A 12-year-old boy shoots his grandparents in their sleep, sets fire to their home, and flees into the night with their car, their dog, and $33. When police find him hours later, he shows almost no emotion. He doesn't cry. He doesn't beg for forgiveness. He simply says they deserved it.
Christopher Pittman was born on April 9, 1989. He grew up in Oxford, Florida, with his father and his sister Danielle, but calling it a stable upbringing would be a stretch. His mother was never really there. She abandoned the family when Christopher was just 2 years old. Over the years, she would reappear briefly, offer a glimpse of normalcy, then vanish again without warning. Each time, she left a little more damage behind. His father, meanwhile, had been married and divorced 3 times. He raised Christopher and Danielle through much of their childhood, but their relationship was tense and turbulent. Christopher would later describe his father as harsh, at times violent. It was a bond that eroded steadily over time. With no stable home base,
Following that suicide threat, Christopher was admitted to a psychiatric facility in Florida for 6 days. He was diagnosed with depression and prescribed Paxil, an antidepressant that notably is no longer recommended for patients under 18. At the time, however, that warning didn't exist, and so Christopher Pittman, age 12, began his first course of psychiatric medication. After his release, his father agreed to let him go live temporarily with his grandparents in Chester County, South Carolina. Joe Pittman, 66, and Joy Pittman, 62, were well regarded in their community, kind, church-going people, and Christopher genuinely adored them. He had spent as much time with them as he possibly could throughout his childhood, because being with them was the closest thing to peace he had ever known. Still, Joe could be strict. Now that Christopher was living under his roof full-time, he made that clear. For a boy already carrying deep wounds from a demanding father, the familiarity of that strictness was difficult to process, even when it came from someone he loved. Once settled with his grandparents, Christopher finally experienced something he had rarely known: consistency. The community liked him. Neighbors saw a quiet, polite, funny kid. For a brief moment, things seemed to be heading in the right direction.
On the morning of November 28, 2001, Christopher was sent home from school after trying to choke a classmate on the school bus, something entirely out of character. His grandparents punished him and sent him to his room. His grandfather raised the possibility of sending him back to Florida, back to his father. That evening, the family went to church as usual. Christopher was agitated throughout the service, kicking the piano near where he was sitting, disrupting the pianist. His grandparents left early. Back home, he was punished again. Christopher would later claim that at some point that night, his grandfather beat him with a belt for attempting to leave his room before his punishment was over. Then, sometime before midnight, Christopher Pittman took a shotgun, one he had been taught how to use, loaded it, walked into his grandparents' bedroom, and shot them both as they slept. 2 shots into his grandfather's mouth, 2 shots into his grandmother's head. Afterward, he lit candles around the house to start a fire, took $33, his grandparents' car, their golden retriever, and drove away into the night. He was found the following morning, roughly 60 kilometers away, his car stuck in the woods. He had encountered 2 hunters and told them he had just been kidnapped after watching someone murder his grandparents. The hunters found his behavior strange. They contacted police. Under questioning, Christopher first described his kidnapper in elaborate detail, a large black man who had committed the murders and abducted him. The story was detailed enough that investigators initially believed it. But after several hours of interrogation, Christopher confessed. He was calm throughout. He said his grandparents had deserved it. He said he wasn't sorry. Christopher was 12 years old. Despite this, the court decided he would be tried as an adult. His trial, delayed multiple times, finally began on January 31, 2005, when Christopher was 15. At its center was a question that divided psychiatrists, lawyers, and jurors alike. Did Zoloft make him do it?
The prosecution argued that Christopher knew exactly what he was doing. He had covered his tracks, setting the fire to destroy evidence, fleeing the scene, fabricating a kidnapping story, accusing an innocent man. That level of planning, they argued, required full awareness of right and wrong. He killed because he was angry at being punished. Simple as that. The defense told a different story. His attorney, a lawyer who had spent years fighting pharmaceutical companies in civil cases and who took this case pro bono, argued that Christopher was not in control of himself that night. He had been switched abruptly between two powerful antidepressants. His dosage had been doubled despite severe side effects, and his young, fragile mind was overwhelmed. According to the defense, Christopher was suffering a Zoloft-induced psychotic episode. He was hearing voices, what one defense psychiatrist called command hallucinations, voices ordering him to pull the trigger. He was not fully conscious of what he was doing. He believed in some altered state that it wasn't real. Christopher himself, in interviews conducted in prison, confirmed this account. He said that as he lay in bed that night, he was suddenly overcome by rage and heard voices in his head repeating, "Do it, do it, do it," and that the voices became so overwhelming he lost control. He said he believed he was dreaming. Psychiatrists from both sides agreed on one thing: Zoloft does have serious side effects in children. Where they disagreed was on causation. The prosecution's experts maintained that Christopher was simply an angry, disturbed child who had committed a deliberate act of violence. The defense's experts argued the drug had chemically altered his mental state to the point where he had lost the capacity to control his actions. The defense also attempted to present internal Pfizer documents suggesting the company had been aware of these risks for years, but only one such document was admitted as evidence, not nearly enough to make the case. On February 15, 2005, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Christopher Pittman guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole, the minimum mandatory sentence for murder under South Carolina.
After the verdict, Pfizer acknowledged that there was an elevated risk of agitation during Zoloft treatment, but its chief psychiatrist insisted there was no proven link between the medication and homicide. Christopher appealed. His lawyers argued he never should have been tried as an adult and that his sentence was disproportionate. Had he been tried as a juvenile, he would have faced 9 years and been free by 21. The appeal was rejected in 2008. In July 2010, a judge ordered a new trial on the grounds that his original attorneys had been ineffective. But in December 2010, Christopher accepted a plea deal. His sentence was reduced from 30 years to 25 in exchange for a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter. His projected release date was February 22, 2023. He would have been 33.
In October 2004, before Christopher's trial had even concluded, the FDA ordered Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies to add a black box warning to antidepressants, alerting patients that these drugs could trigger suicidal thoughts and behaviors in children and adolescents. A scientist who spent 14 years at Pfizer later corroborated what the defense had argued. Zoloft can, in certain individuals, particularly young ones, produce radical behavioral changes. And Christopher Pittman was not alone. In the early 2000s, reports began surfacing of children and adults on antidepressants who had harmed themselves or others. Parents testified about children who had died by suicide shortly after starting medication. In one case, a man killed his wife, daughter, and granddaughter just 2 days after beginning a similar drug, then turned the gun on himself. Zoloft, Paxil, Prozac. Different names, similar mechanisms, and a growing body of evidence that in some patients, the cure could be more dangerous than the disease. Christopher Pittman's case remains one of the starkest examples of what happens when a broken system, an unstable home, an undertrained prescriber, an underfunded mental health structure fails a child at every possible turn. Was he a killer? Yes. Was he in control? That's the question that was never fully answered. And perhaps that's the most disturbing part of all.